I graduated from university a few years ago and immediately started looking for a job in my field marketing. Finding an entry-level marketing job was tough, so when I was offered a position combining marketing and sales support, I jumped at the chance. The company was medium-sized and specialized in contract staffing and headhunting. They also did subcontracting for a technology provider in recruitment, which perfectly aligned with my other passion, technology. I absolutely loved this job. I handled all stages of the marketing and sales cycle, worked with vendors, event organizers, clients, and employees from all departments, met new people, and dealt with genuinely interesting tasks. I had two bosses. One managed the sales department and the other the marketing department. The marketing manager was practically a kindred spirit. The sales manager, an old school salesman, was an arrogant and stubborn guy in his 50s who loved to brag. With his polished shoes and slick talk, let's call him Dan, we weren't friends. For about a year and a half, everything was great. I spent half my time on marketing, splitting the rest between sales support and client work. Client work involved creating custom career websites or job boards for hosting the front end of the recruitment system. It was quite challenging to learn, but with help from web developer friends, I got pretty good at building simple websites. The digital sphere was always close to my heart, so I prioritized digital solutions, leading the company into the era of social media SEO and multi-channel marketing. Dan despised digital. To him, it was a waste of money, but we covered all costs through commercial website development projects. Eventually, the marketing manager left for a better position. Instead of promoting me or hiring a replacement, the company handed marketing duties to Dan. His changes were immediate and sweeping. He cut the technology budget, demanded that 50% of my time go to sales support to boost the sales team's efficiency, and attributed client work to his team's revenue. He rewrote my annual goals, aligning them entirely with the sales department's plan, not marketing. When I objected, he pulled me aside for a friendly talk and said if I didn't like it, I could always leave. Naturally, I later vented to my former marketing manager over drinks. After listening to me for about 45 minutes with sympathy, she raised her hand, said, "Stop," and gave me life-changing advice. Any job rewards you twice. The first payment is the salary you get now. The second is the experience that becomes your capital for the future. So believe me, the money's still coming in fine, but the knowledge isn't. Either find opportunities to grow or change jobs. I took her advice and worked my ass off the next year. I pursued digital projects outside work hours, befriended the support and development teams at the tech provider, attended developer meetups and conferences, studied and earned industry certifications. I joined national marketing and digital marketing associations, scoured blogs and articles, reached out to people, and seized every chance to enhance my skills. I sat through sales team meetings with a smile, while Dan assigned me mundane tasks, so his team of sycophants could pretend they were driving the company's explosive growth. And the growth was indeed impressive, so much so that the company was acquired. That's when Dan screwed me over. You see, managers have the authority to distribute a pool of stock options among high-performing employees. These options have no real value and aren't traded, but in the case of a buyout, they suddenly become valuable, very valuable. Dan deemed it appropriate to award a generous stock package to every salesperson on his team. I didn't get such generosity. I had a verbal agreement with the previous marketing manager that the pool would be shared across the team. So I was, to put it mildly, shocked when I realized I'd been excluded. I confronted Dan about this agreement, to which he replied, and I quote, "Verbal agreements mean nothing. You don't sell, you didn't build this business, so you don't get a share. If you don't like it," he repeated, "the door's always open." That's exactly what I decided to do, but I didn't tell him. The transition of employment contracts worked like this: one day, all staff were terminated from Company X. The next day, they were hired by Company Y. Unused vacation was paid out, An accrual started anew with the new employer. Other conditions, salary seniority, and tenure-based vacation could transfer to the new employer. About 6 weeks before the transition, Dan handed me my new contract. I waited a week, then returned with a couple of enthusiastic questions about new benefits, which he took 2 weeks to answer. Meanwhile, I quietly registered a domain paid for hosting set up WordPress and started building a personal blog. 3 weeks before the transition date, everyone in the office was scrambling to close as many deals as possible, and no one cared about employment contracts. I approached Dan again, saying there were a couple more points to clarify, and that I'd email them to him before signing. I spent a few more evenings compiling blog posts on recruitment technology, mostly my personal work. A week later, I sent a couple of complex questions about benefit transfers. Dan, of course, forgot about them, and by the transition week, he got an earful from HR for my contract still being unsigned. He dragged me into a meeting room and gave me a dressing down. I explained that I was waiting for his response on those specific points before signing, saying I didn't want to lose out transitioning to the new role. I brought up the lack of stock options as an example. Visibly annoyed, he said the phrase I'd been waiting for. If there's no signed contract on my desk by Friday, don't bother coming in on Monday. He paused for dramatic effect and added, I'm serious. You won't have a job. I replied that I understood and that everything necessary would be on his desk by the end of the workday on Friday. On Friday afternoon, Dan, as usual, left the office early for his client networking long lunches with booze. At 4:45 p.m., I saved the final forecast and report files to the shared drive, sent an email to the IT department, transferring access to the marketing account, which stored the global database of logins and passwords for all digital assets, including client websites, an Excel file with my macros for reports and links to all documentation. I forwarded my work phone to Dan's number, locked my laptop, and left it on his desk along with my badge. Over the weekend, I launched my website and added my contact info to LinkedIn, including a status of actively seeking work. I figured my vacation payout would cover a couple of weeks of downtime before I'd need to dive back into work. On Monday, I enjoyed a long walk in the spring sunshine with my dog, who was thrilled that her human didn't disappear at 7:20 a.m. as usual. We stopped for coffee at a local cafe, and my phone started ringing. It was one of the salespeople from my former job. I ignored it and continued strolling through the park in no rush. By the time I got home, my phone had rung 8 or 9 more times things were hitting the fan. I listened to voicemails ignoring those from former colleagues, and called back 2 former clients to inform them my contract had ended, and recommended they contact Dan for unfinished tasks or the tech provider directly for support. Soon after, a friend from the tech provider support team, now handling requests I used to manage, called me. He listened to my story with growing interest and said he'd call back. 10 minutes later, I was on the phone with his supervisor. She asked about my culinary preferences and suggested meeting at a nearby Thai restaurant. Over a plate of spicy cow soy, she enthusiastically outlined the perks of working as a contractor, mentioned rates for highly skilled certified specialists their company desperately needed, and gave me the contact of a recruiter possibly from their approved list. I called him on my way home. Meanwhile, my collection of voicemails from Dan grew by the hour, as he began to realize the full extent of the mess he'd created. By evening, HR had apparently figured out what happened. I received a polite SMS from the regional HR director's personal number requesting a short conversation. I called back and explained the options Dan had given me on Friday, saying I essentially had no choice but to follow his instructions. They started asking clarifying questions, and it quickly became clear that HR had no idea Dan was issuing me ultimatums. Then they informed me that to benefit from the stock sale, I would have needed to transition to the new company and work there for a full year. When I explained I had no stock options, there was a 4-second pause. It turned out HR hadn't been informed of that either. I mentioned I'd appreciate it if Dan stopped calling me as I found it unprofessional and had no intention of working under him again. We politely wrapped up the conversation. I wished them the best and expressed regret that the situation unfolded this way. My contract with the tech providers agency came through at 11:00 p.m. that evening. I signed and returned it the next day. 3 months after this whole ordeal, I met someone from the old IT team at a conference. He excitedly recounted what happened next. The first red flag was a support request asking who to transfer my LastPass account access to, and why I was transferring it in the first place. One of the IT guys went to my floor to find me and saw an empty desk. He asked colleagues where I was. No one knew. That led to the first call to my phone from a salesperson trying to locate me. The technician went to Dan's desk, found my laptop badge and a sticky note. He put two and two together, checked the access logs, and saw I last logged into the system on Friday. He locked my account for security and went to HR to check for a termination form. HR looked no form. Next to the contract status was a big red X. HR called Dan, who wasn't in the office. Dan said, "No, the contract should be on my desk. It was definitely there on Friday. I'm out right now. Give me until lunch to sort it out." Obviously, he thought I was just posturing. He started calling me and leaving voicemails, getting angrier as he realized I wasn't coming back. When he returned to the office, he couldn't find my contract either. He went to HR and started explaining what happened, saying I'd been dragging my feet the whole time, but it was no big deal, he'd handle me himself. HR responded, "No, this is our issue now, and the HR director sent me the SMS." Right after our call, the HR director went to a sales team meeting and called Dan in. They disappeared into a meeting room. One can only imagine Dan had to lay out the entire chain of events and address my complaints. I suspect he spilled everything. After that, Dan got a dressing down only HR and senior management can deliver to someone who royally screwed up. He was demoted, removed from marketing, had his budget cut in half, and a new marketing department was created. His team faced a collective audit and had to handle their own reporting analytics and metrics, everything I used to do centrally and efficiently. This significantly reduced their effectiveness. A couple of people quit, and they botched several key deals. They completely tanked the client website projects. They scrambled to find my replacement, and Dan was reportedly stunned to learn that skilled tech marketers were hard to come by and cost a fortune. They couldn't fill the position, and website development was handed back to the tech provider, who now had just the right specialist, me. I ended up working on 3 such projects, handling them full-time. I'm pretty sure Dan saw the project budgets and knew my daily rate, which was noticeably higher than his. As head of sales, Dan spent a whole year enduring the boss's wrath before he could cash out his stock options. That year must have been a blast. He tried to jump ship 2 weeks after the anniversary, but the company enforced a 6-month notice period, plus a 1-year non-compete clause. All the stock money would have gone to living expenses during that time, unless he moved to another city or industry. The last I heard, Dan was still looking for work. Meanwhile, I'm living happily as a contractor. I get paid for the hours I work, and I work as many hours as I want. My former marketing manager is now a vice president at some major international company. I've repeated her speech countless times when giving career advice to young and burned out employees. Story 2. The store manager told me to give a customer everything she wanted for free, but she underestimated the scale of her audacity. I once worked at a convenience store chain. This was about 22 years ago. I worked there for exactly 1 year, 7 months, and 11 days. Anyway, let's get to the malicious compliance. One day, I came in for the afternoon shift around 3 or 4 p.m., and the manager was already gone. She'd left a note. First, she wanted me to get on the register immediately because my colleague who was finishing her shift would start accruing overtime, which was strictly forbidden. No problem, right? Well, there was one small issue. We only had one register with one cash drawer, and the store was packed. I couldn't just hop on the register. My colleague had to count the money in the drawer down to the required amount. Then I had to recount it to confirm it was correct. The drawer had to have a specific amount of cash. She counted down to that amount, recorded the excess to reconcile with the shift's sales total, and I counted up to ensure she didn't make a mistake. All this had to be done before I could take over the register. Following the manager's instructions, we started the process. As soon as I walked in, we warned customers there'd be a slight delay while we counted the cash and switched shifts. This prompted groans. Nobody wanted to wait. But what choice did they have other than standing in line, right? Then there was this one woman. She was about 8th or ninth in line with 25-30 people total. The store was absolutely packed, no joke. I initially ignored everyone, just trying to finish the count as quickly as possible to start serving. While my colleague finished counting and handed me the drawer, this woman started getting louder. She went from muttering under her breath to speaking normally as if addressing everyone in line. I was counting as fast as I could, but she escalated from simple complaints to incitement. This lady started riling up the crowd, trying to turn people against us and spark a full-on riot in the store. She said things like, "We shouldn't have to wait this long. Right? We should get our purchases for free for this kind of wait." Yes, she was addressing the entire line, and I noticed some people nodding in response to her instigation. At that point, I stopped counting and loudly said, "I'm sorry for the slight delay, but please understand, we're required to count the cash to avoid shortages. I'm trying to finish as quickly as possible. I've got about a minute left and I'll start serving. Thank you for your patience." Then I dove back into counting. This calmed most people in the line who were already fidgeting and shifting from foot to foot. But that woman, my speech only made her angrier. She completely lost it and started yelling that she shouldn't have to wait for service and deserve free chips and a sandwich as compensation. Then the profanity started, "Screw you all," and so on. I stopped again, looked right at her and said, "Please, ma'am, don't swear in the store. There are a lot of kids here." There were indeed about 7 or 8 kids around, mostly families. Of course, it only got worse. A torrent of curses poured out of her mouth. Now she was screaming across the store. I finished counting the cash and told her that if she didn't stop, I wouldn't serve her and would have to ask her to leave. I just wanted to protect the kids in the store. The line had shrunk to about 5 people because many left due to her behavior. But she seemed to take it as a personal insult and launched into a rant. "You're obligated to serve me, and I'm not leaving until I want to." I stared at her and said, "Oh, really?" I told her to leave and started serving other customers, saying I wasn't going to serve her and that she should put her items down and get out. Then came the classic, "You don't have the right to kick me out." She literally pushed through the line, shoving people aside to get to the register. I repeated, "Put down the chips and sandwich. I'm not serving you. If you don't leave, I'll call the police." Long story short, I did have to call the police, but she bolted a couple of minutes before they arrived. Now, you're probably wondering, where's the malicious compliance? Well, just 15 minutes after she left the store, the regional manager called me, yelling into the phone, "You called the police on a customer." He didn't let me get a word in, ranting about service and customer care, and told me the woman would come back tomorrow, and I had to personally apologize to her and give her everything she wanted for free. The next day, I came to the store, and the manager was waiting for me. She immediately called me into the office, handed me a write-up for rude behavior toward a customer, and for kicking her out without a valid reason. She didn't let me say a word in my defense. Then she informed me that when the woman came in, I had to apologize and give her everything she brought to the register for free. I was dumbfounded. My plan was simple: wait for her to show up, tell her to go to hell, and quit slamming the door. But things didn't go quite as planned. A few hours later, after the manager had gone home, the woman walked in not alone, but with her dad, husband, cousin, sister, and a bunch of kids. They all grabbed baskets and started filling them with items. She approached me and said, "Your boss said I could take whatever I want for free." I was stunned, thinking, no way she thinks she's getting all this for her whole crew for free. I told her, "Hold on a second," and called the manager at home. She was furious that I bothered her and didn't let me say more than "the woman is here." The manager started yelling at me. "I already gave you instructions." I tried to interject, but she didn't come alone. But the manager screamed, "Do you want to be fired? Just apologize and give her everything she wants." I smiled and said, "You want me to give her everything she wants for free?" "Are you sure?" The manager yelled into the phone again. "Are you stupid? Didn't you hear me?" "Yes, ma'am. It'll be done." When the woman finally came to the register, I politely bowed and apologized as sincerely as I could. I wanted to wipe that smug grin off her face, but I held back and started scanning the items from the baskets she placed on the counter. I explained that I had to scan everything to generate a receipt for $780 worth of goods. Internally, I was cracking up. The next day, when I came to work, a whole crew was waiting for me. The store manager, the regional manager, the district manager, and a company security officer. They immediately took me to the office. I explained that the regional manager told me to give the woman everything she wanted for free. When she came with her entire family, I called the manager at home because I was pretty sure she didn't mean the whole gang. The manager yelled at me, "You didn't tell me her whole family wanted free stuff too." I calmly replied, "I tried to tell you, but you wouldn't listen, called me stupid, and asked if I wanted to be fired. So I did, as you instructed." They started reviewing the footage. Our store had an excellent surveillance system with audio recording. The manager's voice was hard to hear, but when I clarified what she said, they could make it out. Then they asked me to step out. From behind the door, I heard the volume rise to shouting and then drop back to normal conversation. About an hour later, they called me back in. The regional manager said they had just reviewed the footage from the incident day. He apologized to me, said the woman had called the office and lied through her teeth, and the district manager hadn't bothered to review the footage before calling him, adding that if he'd done his job properly, this mess wouldn't have happened. They also said the woman was now permanently banned from our store. If she showed up, we were to call the police immediately and file a trespass order. That was it. I never saw that woman again. 2 weeks later, we had a new district manager and a new store manager. I still fondly recall that story. I'm thrilled I didn't tell her to go to hell and quit that day. Well, that's it. Thanks for watching this video to the end. That's all our stories for today. Watch our previous video, which you'll see right here. Be sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And good luck to you.